Greetings, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to speak at Congreso Futuro in Chile. I'm Victor Dzau from the U.S. National Academy of Medicine. What I want to talk about today is a world in disorder, the need for global solidarity and equity. I want to talk about COVID-19 pandemic, which has plagued the entire globe, and the importance of us all coming together to attack this virus, to stop it, and to achieve equity where everybody has a chance to do well. So in 2016, with the outbreak of Ebola in West Africa, the United Nations High-Level Commission, organized by Secretary General, recommended that a monitoring board for pandemic being established. In 2018, the World Bank and the World Health Organization co-convened a Global Prepare Monitoring Board, GPMB, which included myself and Janet Vega from Chile and others. In 2019, we released our first report. We called it The World at Risk. And this report warned of a very real threat of a rapidly spreading pandemic due to a lethal respiratory pathogen, and the need for determined political leadership at national and global levels. Well, this report was very prophetic. Of course, although at that time we think this may happen in the future, this past year we witnessed a real respiratory pathogen that's caused a pandemic, COVID-19. This report called for 7 urgent actions to prepare the world for health emergencies. It calls for heads of government, countries and regional organizations, multilateral institutions, financing institutions, developing assistance, and United Nations all to work together to strengthen the world in preparedness and response. And of course, we know that from this report, not much happened. So that, of course, this past year, we indeed observed COVID-19. This data shows you how devastating COVID-19 is globally. This data on December 21st showed that there's 77 million cases of COVID globally, with 1.7 million deaths. In the United States, we have 18 million cases with 320,000 deaths, which is the highest number in the world. It's very unfortunate that this has been such a disaster, but COVID-19 is not only a health crisis, it's also a crisis of education, of climate, of poverty, and all of society. Shown in this slide is the disruption of health system. 90% health system are disrupted by COVID-19. 1.6 students out of school because of 1.6 billion students out of school because of COVID-19. Their investment in clean energy, according to SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, has gone down by 30%, and more than 135 million people in the world are pushed into poverty. So what have we learned from COVID-19? That it is a collective failure of all of us to take pandemic prevention, preparedness response seriously, and prioritize accordingly. We live in a world where a shock anywhere can become a catastrophe everywhere because we live in an interconnected world. I think COVID-19 also taught us that human dimensions of preparedness have been overlooked, that we must have responsible leaders and citizens play an important role, that we must have leaders that make decisive decisions based on science and evidence and avoid politicization, and the citizen must play a role in protecting themselves and protecting each other. We also learned that current measures of preparedness are not predictive. The Global Health Security Index, which measures preparedness until to date, show that US ranked number 1 in some of the measurements, but of course, US has not done very well. Health emergency preparedness requires effective, agile systems, and pandemic preparedness is a common good. We must invest for global health security because the return is immense. So in other words, no one is safe until all are safe. And global preparedness is not simply the sum of national preparedness. And of course, the world of preparedness is already complex. It needs consolidation, not further fragmentation. So in 2020, in September, we released our second report, A World in Disorder, which is the topic of my talk today. And GPMB called for urgent actions to strengthen the current response to COVID-19 and to better prepare the world for future pandemics and health emergencies. It is 5 different recommendations: responsible leadership, engaged citizenship, strong agile system for health security, robust global governance of preparedness, and sustained investment. And I'll quickly talk about each one of these in the next few minutes. First, response leadership. As I said, the countries which have done well have strong leadership. Leadership that responded early and make decisions based on science and not politics. And leadership that creates a national strategy and coordination. Second, we need engaged citizenship. Everyone counts. And therefore, everyone must work together for the public good. That every citizen should protect themselves through wearing masks or social distancing and protect each other. Third is a really robust governance of preparedness. We must amend international health regulation to the General Assembly, the World Health Assembly, and we must develop mechanisms for assessing multi-sectoral preparedness, including simulation exercise that test the capacity of health emergency preparedness. We must also develop a simple but effective international framework of governance. The fourth important area is strong and agile systems for health security. The heads of government must strengthen national systems for preparedness. It has to be an all-of-society approach. From One Health that integrates animal and human health, to building public health capacities and workforce, to strengthening health systems with surge capacity, and to have systems in place for social protection. Heads of government must strengthen WHO as an impartial international organization and to renew the commitment to a multilateral system. Fifth, we must invest, and the G20 leaders, UN, the institutional financing institutions must all come together to recognize preparedness is a global common good and not at the mercy of political and economic cycles. Nations must ensure that adequate finance is made available so that we can mitigate current and future crises. And also we must create a mechanism to come together for sustainable financing of global health security, which mobilizes resources in scale, in time, and not relying on only assistance. So importantly, the research sector, together with the private sector and all the organizations, must coordinate and support research and development in health emergencies and create a sustainable mechanism to quickly develop and have equitable access to vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostic, and non-pharmaceutical interventions. These are the main recommendations that we forward, and we certainly are working very hard to be sure there's engagement, discussion to implement this, because together we have to fight this pandemic. So when you look at where we are today, this slide shows you on the left-hand side the government response in different countries. And this is measured by stringency index, which is how stringent and how strong is response, particularly as it relates to public health. As you can see in the slide, in March, April, there was a good increase, but then it became a steady state. And right now we're dealing with about 70% of stringency. And yet on the right-hand side, you can see the number of cases continue to rise, which simply means that what we're doing is not sufficient. We need vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostic, PPE countermeasures, in addition to public health measures. And this is where many countries have begun to respond to this, but the big countries, the ones which are mobilizing nationalistic responses, are US, China, and Russia. These are big countries. In the US, we have a mechanism called Active and Operation Warp Speed, where we spend now $18 billion US to develop vaccines and therapeutics and others. And China and Russia have also developed vaccines. But unfortunately, the rest of the world are not as well resourced, not as rich, not as big, and not as well organized. Which means at the beginning of this pandemic, countries, especially the poor countries, were really at great risk, trying to find ways to come together. So on March the 10th, GPMB, which Jeanette Vega and myself serve on, called for $18 billion to be injected to support vaccines, drugs, and therapy and diagnostics. And out of this call for $88 billion is a response by European Commission, President von der Leyen, who held an international pledge event, which over a period of 7 weeks brought $18 billion. So this is a very good news for a starting point. But how do we actually mobilize all the players to play together in a multilateral fashion? Access COVID Tools Accelerator, or ACT Accelerator, was formed around the same time to bring together different actors to together move faster in the tools necessary to fight COVID-19 and to access to assure equity in access. This is unprecedented because before ACT Accelerator, the many entities as shown in this circle are working independently. Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccine Immunization, purchased vaccine for the poor countries. CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, develops vaccine from research to clinical trials. Wellcome Trust is a foundation, charitable foundation, and of course, WHO, Global Fund, the World Bank, Unitaid Fund, they have all come together voluntarily under the umbrella of ACT Accelerator in order to work together to respond to this global threat of COVID-19. This is the structure of the ACT Accelerator. Governing this is the WHO, European Commission, 26 government leaders, and non-government partners. And coordinating this is a coordinating hub with the ACT Accelerator principle, of which I'm one of them. Underneath, you can see are 3 different pillars: vaccine partnership, therapeutics partnership, diagnostic partnership, with a health system going across as a connector. Importantly, if you look at each one of these partnerships, it covers from research, development to manufacturing to procurement, deployment. So in other words, first time, for example, in vaccine, CEPI, Gavi, WHO is coming together. So they can go from research to procurement to deployment, and the same organization for therapeutics and diagnostics. ACT Accelerator has come together for last 8 months since April and has made many successes and accomplishment in a voluntary fashion. The goal of ACT Accelerator is 2 billion vaccine doses by the end of 2021, 245 million courses by mid-2021, and 500 million tests by mid-2021. I won't have time to go over the accomplishments except to say, of course, right now, there are now vaccines which are now approved for use. Dexamethasone was a therapeutics that was introduced through this work, and now we have rapidly diagnostic testing using antigen testing. Countries such as United States and to some extent Russia and China have successfully procured and developed vaccines, but they're not immediately sharing with the world, although now there's beginning efforts. So that left many countries behind. At one point, about 60-70% of vaccines were already cornered by about 10% population rich countries. So what does the rest of the world do? The poor countries, the middle income countries, and the small upper income countries. Small countries such as Singapore with 5.8 million people only, Canada, not small in geography, but it's only 35 million people. So they have to find a way to be sure they guarantee vaccine as everybody's developing them. So the accelerated vaccine pillar called COVAX, C-O-V-A-X is seen here, has come together to encourage countries to come together to pool their resources, to purchase vaccines together, and to make commitment to the poor population and to people at risk. We have very good news. After a lot of hard work, 190 economies and countries have come together that covers 80 to 90% of the population. And so now we have a mechanism to get multilateralism in vaccine. The problem, however, is accelerator COVAX, every country, rich or poor, have a right to have access to vaccine, the idea of multilateralism. The coordination of rollout of vaccines, I'll talk about briefly, the distribution of vaccines, and of course, public trust. Ultimately, we need a sustainable coordinating framework and financing mechanism for the future, particularly between pandemics. In summary, COVID has demonstrated the importance of 4 critical interconnected dimensions of preparedness response: responsible leadership, engaged citizens, agile systems, sustained investment. Multilateralism is the linkage at the center, bringing all functions together at all levels, local, national, regional. And of course, we must believe in global solidarity, and there must be equity for everyone, because the pandemic will not be over until everyone's protected. Thank you very much.